He was recalling the last of the 10 Commandments. Stated twice, once in the book of Exodus and once in Deuteronomy, this commandment warns us not to covet anything belonging to our neighbor. Again, whether or not one considers this instruction to be divine, one can see that it is wise. Most human strife, from divorce to war, arises from the impulse to grab what does not belong to us. To covet is to be enslaved by greed for possessions, sensations, status, or power. Now, consider the logic of a capitalist economy. In order for profits and businesses to perpetually grow, our appetite for whatever the businesses sell must grow perpetually as well. The purpose of advertising is to provoke in us an incessant craving for more. More style, more speed, more dialing minutes, more hamburger for a buck, more horsepower, more sex appeal, more glamour, more laughs, more thrills. 24 hours a day, through every medium of communication, advertising proclaims, "Thou shalt covet." It would be difficult to exaggerate the pervasiveness of advertising. Nearly every surface is plastered with ads: bus shelters, gas pumps, the interiors of elevators, the shells of eggs in supermarkets, trays at airport security counters, room keys in motels, the paper sheets on doctors' examining table. I am not making any of those up. Until the built environment begins to resemble the costumes of race car drivers, every square inch peddling some product. Market researchers estimate that an American city dweller now encounters some 5,000 ads in one medium or another every day. 5,000 per day. Radio, television, internet, billboards, bus kiosks, shirts, everywhere, storefronts, 5,000 a day. The central purpose of these blandishments is to make you hunger for something you do not already have, make you dissatisfied with your life so you will lay out money to compensate for the lack or the flaw. Since no purchase will ever quell this dissatisfaction, you will have to keep buying, urged on by ubiquitous ads. Along with praising greed, this marketing blitz overturns several other of the 10 Commandments, such as keeping the Sabbath holy and shunning idols and telling the truth. And it encourages nearly all 7 of the deadly sins, notably pride, sloth, envy, gluttony, and lust. It's almost a perfect record. Advertising does not create these impulses, of course. It merely exploits them. And it does so with the best talent and techniques that money can buy. How much money? In 2006, expenditures on all forms of advertising in the United States totaled over $300 billion. That works out to roughly $1,000 per capita. If you live in a household of 4, $4,000 were spent that year for the purpose of selling you things. And we can't fund our schools. There is no comparably well-funded and pervasive and relentless influence appealing to our virtuous impulses, such as compassion, humility, generosity, prudence, fidelity, or thrift. The home might provide a counter to consumerism, but when American children spend on average 15 minutes a day talking with their parents and 5 hours watching screens, television and computers, it's clear that the family has been overwhelmed by the market. By the time these children, these average American children, finish 12th grade, they have spent more time watching television than attending school. And most schools, when they are not dealing with the consequences of poverty, addiction, broken homes, child abuse, and other social pathologies, concentrate on preparing students to enter the workforce and become lifelong consumers. Churches might be expected to counter consumerism, especially in this nation where more than 3/4 of the populace claim to be followers of Jesus. And yet, far from calling for material simplicity, many of the most vociferous Christians preach a gospel of prosperity. Televangelists assure their listeners that God wants them to be rich. Ministers in the fastest growing churches have become entertainment impresarios whose main business is to fill their vast sanctuaries with high-paying crowds. Such ministers may swell the crowds by denouncing homosexuals or decrying abortion or vilifying welfare queens, but they are unlikely to whisper a word against recreational shopping or stock market gambling or the insatiable pursuit of wealth or usury, which is the charging of interest, which is condemned 10 times as often in the Bible as is homosexuality. I do not see how such a religion, at least as it is practiced in the most vocal churches in our country, or such an economy as we have, can be reconciled with the teachings of Jesus of Nazareth. Like Jesus, the Buddha would have seen the madness of an economy devoted to the endless expansion of desire. In his moment of enlightenment, the Buddha realized that human suffering arises from craving and clinging, for whatever we crave or cling to is bound eventually to pass away, including our own ravenous self. And so the Buddha dedicated the rest of his long life after his enlightenment to devising a philosophy aimed at curbing desire. He understood that our wants are potentially infinite, while our needs are modest. We need nutritious food, adequate shelter, durable clothing, useful tools, medical care, companionship, intellectual stimulation, and art, all of which could be secured in a modest fashion without jeopardizing the prospects for future generations. Once our real needs are met, we could live in peace and contentment if we did not always yearn for something more. Thoreau recognized this constant hankering for more as a driving force in the industrial economy of his own day and as a perennial source of human misery. His title for the first and by far the longest chapter of Walden, after all, is Economy, in which he announced his intent to challenge the prevailing ways of getting and spending. In that opening chapter, he examines one by one our basic needs, and he suggests how they might be met without exhausting ourselves or the world. Again and again, he counters the force, the yearning for excess, with a call for frugality, as when he observes, "It is possible to invent a house still more convenient and luxurious than we have, which yet all would admit that man could not afford to pay for. Shall we always study to obtain more of those things and not sometimes to be content with less?" He's not going to get a job on Madison Avenue, Henry David Thoreau. This man who was content with a diet of potatoes, rice, beans, and pond water knew that many people would regard his estimate of our basic needs as too austere. He wrote, "There is a certain class of unbelievers who sometimes ask me such questions as, if I think that I can live on vegetable food alone. and to strike at the root of the matter at once, for the root is faith, I am accustomed to answer such that I can live on board nails. If they cannot understand that, they cannot understand much that I have to say. Here again, if Thoreau exaggerates his austerity, it is by way of countering what he saw as the profligacy of his contemporaries. The profligacy of American society today would, I expect, have dumbfounded him, as it should dismay and dumbfound us. Near the end of his life, Thoreau observed that most men do not care for nature and would sell their share in all her beauty as long as they may live for a stated sum, many for a glass of rum. Thank God men cannot as yet fly and lay waste the sky as well as the earth. We are safe on that side for the present. It is for the very reason that some do not care for those things that we need to continue to protect all from the vandalism of a few. The vandalism of a few is still a threat to natural beauty, as witness the push by a handful of corporations, lobbyists, and public officials to open the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge to oil drilling so we can continue to drive SUVs, or to carve up the last remnants of old-growth forests with logging roads. But today, the vandalism of the many is the greater threat. Billions of ordinary people, including myself, obeying our appetites and the enticements of the marketplace, are laying waste to the sky as well as the land and sea. Nature is already imposing limits on the human economy through resource depletion and ecological breakdown. If humans were as wise as we claim to be by calling ourselves Homo sapiens sapiens, we would do voluntarily what nature will otherwise force on us. We would restrain our appetites. We would fashion an economy based on needs rather than wants. We would measure every product, every technology, every private or public decision against the standard of ecological and communal health. As a first step in that direction, let us quit using the word consumer. And let us use instead the close synonym devourer. Thus, the Office of Consumer Affairs would become the Office of Devourer Affairs.